the logistics of the webinar. So welcome everyone to this morning Forum Kajian Pembangunan. My name is Lydia Napitupulu from the FKP Secretariat. So as you can see on your screen, I have just launched polling, so maybe what you'll see now are the polls. Everyone is muted for this webinar. When we enter the Q&A session, please use the raise hand function. You will find it on one of the links at the bottom of your screen. Maybe if there's 3 dots, you can click on that or on your name and then use the raise hand function. I will unmute you during the Q&A to pose your question yourself. Also, you can find the slides in the Dropbox. Hopefully, it will be there in a few minutes. And this webinar is recorded, so please be aware. You don't want to say anything you don't want the public to know. And also, you can see the recording later on YouTube. This is also live streamed through YouTube. So if you have friends who don't want to log into Zoom or don't have a Zoom application, they can watch it on YouTube. Just search for the title of this presentation. The FKP Secretariat received support from the ANU Indonesia project and from the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This morning, we are going to discuss the topic of what's missing from the teacher and principal training in Indonesia. This is based on the experience of the INSPIRASI Foundation in Indonesia and also global school leaders or pemimpin in Malaysia. So we have 2 speakers from INSPIRASI Foundation, Patrya Pratama, and Cheryl and Fernando from Pemimpin in Malaysia. So I'm not going to do a lengthy introduction, but please feel free, Patrya and Cheryl, to introduce yourselves during your presentation and also your organization. We have about 20 minutes for each speakers, and then we have hopefully about 40 minutes for Q&A. So the one who will present first is it Patrya or Cheryl?
Could be either way. You want to go first, Cheryl, or?
I can go first, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so hang on while I share screen. Yeah, can you see the screen now?
All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Cheryl and Fernando, and I'm from Malaysia. I live in Kuala Lumpur. So before this, before I started PEMIMPIN-GSL, I worked as a secondary school teacher. Teach for Malaysia. Under Teach for Malaysia, it's the equivalent to Indonesia Mengajar there in Indonesia. So as a secondary school teacher, I taught in a rural area in Malaysia, in Kedah. And during my time teaching in Kedah, I saw a lot of issues and struggles with our Malaysian education system. So that really inspired me to take on the challenge to start PEMIMPIN-GSL and to work with our global school leaders partners. So I'll share with you a bit about what PEMIMPIN-GSL is. If you can go to the next slide. So, so we are actually a non-profit in Malaysia. We've worked with about 90 schools, and we are currently working with 90 schools, 20 school leaders, and we have 3 cohorts. So we have completed 1 cohort of school leaders and 2 ongoing. Our vision is actually to make sure that every school in Malaysia is led by an effective, high-quality school leader who will drive transformation. So what we do is we actually train our school leaders, we give them the skills, the motivation, and the knowledge for them to improve student outcomes. How we do this is we use a lot of technology to help them improve processes in schools. We help them work on a school improvement plan, and most importantly is to ensure equitable education in schools. So in Malaysia, some schools, especially if you are from urban areas, they have more opportunities than schools from rural areas or urban poor areas. So what we try to do is to work with the school leaders to ensure that they are giving the equitable education for each of the students, regardless of where they come from. So if you go to the next slide, today I just want to focus a bit on what happened during the pandemic and what are some of the challenges that we saw in Malaysia. So for those of you who don't know, Malaysia has a very centralized education system, meaning that all our instructions, everything is controlled by the federal government. And during the pandemic, it showed us that there are great things that can happen from a centralized system, and there are also disadvantages. So the first things we saw is student well-being. So a lot of schools and students that we work with come from the lower income families, and a lot of their families lost their jobs during lockdown. And school leaders were very concerned and very worried about the student well-being. The second is, of course, an issue that is all over the world, which is digital divide. Access to technology and data is not the same for every student. Before this, when we talked about education inequity, it was, does these people, are they getting a quality education? But during the pandemic, it was even more evident of how unfair the system is. For students who had great access to the internet, they could continue learning as usual. For students who didn't have access, there's no way they could learn. And our research shows that at least 37% of Malaysian students do not have access to data or devices that will allow them to use online learning material. And the next is using technology. While Malaysia has always encouraged our teachers to use technology, it has always been just something additional, not the main thing for learning, because traditional teaching was still very big in Malaysia. So a lot of our teachers were not trained adequately on how to use different technology tools to teach. And because, like I said, it's now a centralized system, so we wait a lot for the government to give us instructions before we carry out anything. So if you go to the next slide, some of the things that we did, the first thing that we did is, so in the next slide, you will see that we knew that the moment the lockdown happened, a lot of our school leaders were worried about student well-being. So we did a round of coaching calls. And for us, firstly, it was very important to understand what our school leaders are going through. This pandemic is something that is new to all of us. None of us have been in a pandemic before. So really to try to understand what are their concerns and what are they worried about. And we found that about children from 70 children from our 45 schools were really struggling to make ends meet. So we reached out to different funders and we helped to raise funds to support these families in terms of food and eggs, oil, just the basic necessities. But by the time we reach about 3 weeks into the lockdown, the government has already given these families help. So it was just the initial part that they needed help. The next is digital divide. So because we knew that some students have great access to internet, it's the next slide. Some students had great access, some students did not have access. What we did is that we trained our school leaders on how to teach students from using different internet bandwidths. So for example, we taught our school leaders how to teach students using WhatsApp or Telegram. WhatsApp and Telegram requires very low data. And then we also taught them how to use Google Meet or Google Classroom or Zoom and all of that. And a lot of telecommunication companies started offering free data and free phone. So we really got our schools to use that. In this example here, we have one of our schools, SMK Paya Rumput. The school leader got her entire school just to use Telegram because all her students were from the urban poor community. And every day she set a timetable, and every day the students will go on Telegram and they will learn with their teacher. So that was really inspiring, and how, like, despite all the odds, they really managed to find some way to use technology to continue learning during the lockdown. The next is apprehension to use technology tools. So a lot of the leaders that we train are, sorry, the slide before this, a lot of the leaders we train are in their 40s or 50s. So sometimes they are a bit scared to use technology. And I think of it like my parents. They're very scared to press something in case they break it. So I always tell them, don't worry, you cannot break it. So before this, when we were trying to train our school leaders to use technology, they were very worried. But now, because the pandemic happened, suddenly they became very good at it. I guess because it was necessity, right? When you are forced to do something, you will immediately like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do it. And our school leaders were so creative. Some of them even had a Teachers' Day celebration on Google Meets. They had a retirement celebration just using Google Meet. So I was really amazed and very encouraged to see how our school leaders just overcome all the struggles to use technology to teach. And what we did is that we had a lot of virtual workshops with them, community discussions on social media, and just gave them guidance on how to use technology tools to the best of their ability. And the next for us is really encouraging dialogues on the new normal. So we really used this time to get support and get people from all over Malaysia to actually talk about their struggles. One of our teachers from Sarawak, he shared with us how he did like a Grab homework, like Grab delivery homework. So he actually like took his motorcycle and went to every kampung to deliver homework to his students. And hearing that, some of our teachers in KL were like, okay, maybe we can do that as well. So we during the lockdown, we used a lot of time to get these dialogues ongoing so that people can really discuss what it means to be for education in the new normal, and also so that our teachers will not go back to traditional teaching as it is. Because for us, the fear is that our cases in Malaysia are relatively low. Right now, we have like 15 or 10 COVID cases a day. So with schools reopening, our worry is that everyone goes back to traditional teaching and they forget all the wonderful technology that they used and all the wonderful things that they did during the pandemic. And they have wasted a good pandemic, right? So our aim is that they continue using technology meaningful in the classroom. So it was very important for us to host this webinar session. And the next, you will see some of our schools actually sent us updates on what they were doing. So this is what I say is the advantage of a centralized education system. So because our system is controlled by the federal government, when they come out with directives on the SOPs for school leadership, SOPs for school reopening, it is taken very seriously by schools, meaning almost, I would like confidently say at least 90% of schools in Malaysia follow the SOPs very carefully, because they know that if they don't, then like they will be checked on by the district office. So all schools had like, if you see this picture, the school leader is like, they're doing all this tapak kasut thing. So they put it there so the students know where to walk. The next thing that we did is that if despite some of our classes having 30 or 35 students, the SOP said that one class could only have about 16 students. So our schools made use of their halls, libraries, some even canteens, and everywhere to ensure that they followed that SOP. One school can only have 17 students. And they take it very seriously. Every day they check the temperature. Even if the school has 1,000 students, all 1,000 students, the temperature is checked. They're wearing masks, even up to preschool. Like I was sharing just now, my daughter is in preschool. They wear face shield or they wear masks. So the SOPs are really being taken seriously, because I think learning from other countries around the world, we are concerned and we are worried about the second wave that might hit Malaysia, or some new cluster that can happen in our schools. So this has been taken very seriously. And The last is if you see for like preschool, prasekolah, the teachers really encourage students to wash their hands, to sanitize their hands, and our government has sponsored sanitizers, hand wash. Schools have raised funds to build sinks, additional sinks in school, and they make it part of the routine for the students. Students are not allowed to eat in canteens, so what they do is that food is being sent to their classroom, packed and sent to their classroom. So for me, I'm really encouraged and very happy to see that above all, SOP is taken very seriously. And for us as a non-profit, our role is now to help our school leaders to continue using technology, to help our school leaders to adapt to this new normal that they are facing. On my second last slide, you will see that some of the opportunities and challenges for us now post COVID. I hope Malaysia is we are in what we call a RMCO, like a recovery stage, meaning the worst I hope is over and the country is slowly recovering. But what we see as opportunity is really to enhance the use of technology and learning among students and teachers. Like I mentioned just now, the last thing we want is to go back to traditional teaching now that school has reopened. But what we see as a challenge is the learning gaps. For the past 3 months, a lot of students did not have access to tech. We really want to help our school leaders to assist them to close this gap at least, or to see whether they can provide any remedial interventions for students. The opportunities really for us during this lockdown was that we could train teachers all over Malaysia. Before this, we were very limited geographically because our workshops were physical workshops where everyone had to meet face to face. But now that it's suddenly, borderless, the reach is really much wider. For me, like I said just now, I really admire the way the government has came up with the SOP, how they have instructed all teachers to follow the SOP. But what I wish and what I hope for, and I hope that is in the works, is clearer guidelines now on how can they handle the learning loss that has happened during lockdown, to focus a bit more on teaching and learning and how to work around all the challenges that has happened during COVID. I think that's it for me. I think it's lesser than 20 minutes, but it's okay. If there's any questions, I can answer it now. So, or later. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I was quite surprised to hear that 37% is it of students did not have access to the gadgets or technology in Malaysia. So that's quite surprising to me. But maybe one question from me in terms of loss in learning outcomes. How severe have you seen this for the Malaysia case?
Learning.
Was it that, during the pandemic, and was it the case that even before pandemic, there was no technology being used at all? What was sort of like, if you're thinking about the level, was there technology used before, and how compared to during the pandemic?
I think for us in Malaysia, the government mandated all teachers to use Google Classroom. And before this, while it was used, but not really meaningfully, I think, and not as comprehensive as it should be. So a lot of teachers would use because it's already started. I think we started our journey towards digitalizing education started in about 2013. Where we use different learning platforms, and then finally this year they said it's going to be Google Classroom. So a lot of teachers are trained on how to use, they were starting to get training on how to use Google Classroom when the pandemic happened. So I would say that it was used, but it only suddenly intensified, and I think the pandemic took Malaysia's digital education to we suddenly had a huge leap Malaysian teachers are one of the highest usage for Google Classroom around the world. And it really helped, I think, like especially during this pandemic. So it wasn't as great before, but I think it was really good during the pandemic. I hope it doesn't die off now that school has reopened. I can hear.
I think we might have lost Mbak Lydia, didn't we?
Yeah. All right. No.
Sorry about that. Was that me being lost by?
I think so.
Yeah, I think
So I'm back. So was it me who got lost?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, so apparently I'm back. Sorry, I missed a little bit. Yeah, so I missed a little bit of your answer, Cheryl. So should we move to Pak Patrya now?
Okay.
Okay. Or Cheryl, were you in the midst of
No.
answering?
I finished. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize you were frozen.
Yeah. That's the challenge of technology, even in Indonesia, which is I am in a large city, just a little bit 60 kilometers outside Jakarta, and the internet can get unstable as well. So I don't even want to imagine how it's like outside of Indonesia. So before we do, I guess, Q&A at the end of the presentation, we just take the all the questions at that time. So I will invite Patrya to give the presentation. Do you want to run the slides or should I?
I think I can. I can do it myself. I think if
Okay.
I'll let you know if I come across some trouble, which
yeah,
I usually do.
I have it ready if in case. Yeah.
Okay.
You can just share screen if you click on the
Okay. I hope it's sharing now.
Yes, it's sharing now.
Yeah. Okay. Selamat pagi. Good morning, everyone. So. My name is Patrya Pratama. So I'm now the executive director of the INSPIRASI Foundation in Indonesia. So before I move on with my presentation, I'd like to give a little bit of heads up. Probably in my presentation, I will be using a gado-gado language, campur-campur between bahasa and English. My presentation is in English though, so I'm just making sure that some of the terms are probably easier to be used in Bahasa. So good morning, everyone. I'm gonna just start, I guess, by laying out in general what I'll be talking about. So I'll be introducing a little bit about INSPIRASI and what we do, and then I'll be just laying out what's the situation now in general in Indonesia with regard to challenges regarding training for in-service teacher and or principals. This is regardless of the COVID situation, and then just looking at a little bit of the evidence. What is it actually proven to be what the evidence says about training that works. And then the most important part, of course, is the insights, which includes mistakes that our organizations has made in our training program for school principals. So just to give you a heads up, it's not going to be all rosy what I'm going to be saying. So there will be a lot of mistakes that we do that I think worth sharing with other organizations as well. So just to give a little bit overview tentang INSPIRASI, right? So INSPIRASI is essentially it is similar to what Cheryl's Pemimpin does in Malaysia. We are a Principal Leadership Academy here. So we implemented a principals leadership training programs here in Indonesia. So far, we are working with, in total, is like 87 in-service school principals. And together with them are like 15 supervisors and also their community working groups, which is called K3S, ya, Kelompok Kerja Kepala Sekolah in the region that we're working. So the program is about 1 till 1.5 years of intensive field and forum experience. So workshops followed by pendampingan, ya, coaching at school. So the scenario for us is that at the moment we are still completing a pilot, which should end in 2021, next year, mid-2021, before trying to scale it up and then advocate for government and other organizations to learn from, right? So these 3 years has been quite a revelation because we try to learn as much as we can about what works to support principal leadership. And I think it's worth noting as well that we are supported by some of our sponsors. Here are like Tanoto Foundations, and then Triputra Agro Persada, Asia Philanthropy Circle, Resinda Karawang, because we're working there. So some CSR donation is also there, and then BMJ. And we are also working with some local government partners, of course, because unlike in Malaysia here, it's a very decentralized system, especially if we're working with the basic education level, ya. Pendidikan dasar itu di pemerintah daerah, kota dan kabupaten, dan juga kita kolaborasi kerjasama banyak komunikasi dengan Kementerian Pendidikan, ya, with the Ministry of Education, and we learn a lot also to use the best practices from our Global School Leaders Network. So Pemimpin is actually one of our network also, and there are one in Allocate. It's called Allocate in India, and then Dignitas in Kenya. So we are trying to learn as much as possible regarding what works. So that's about us. So before I go on to the insights of our own program, I would like to, I think, to set the stage a little bit. What is it, the challenge at hand? Ya, tantangannya sebetulnya seperti apa saat ini yang mungkin kita di Indonesia hadapi. So actually in Indonesia, so training, right, for in-service schools or principals, for example, it has been a regular feature, ya, di sistem pendidikan kita. So just to mention a few, one is that at the moment, for example, we have Diklat Calon Kepala Sekolah, right, PPCKS. This is a required training for a potential or aspiring school principal in Indonesia, right? It has a field and forum format. I think a total of 70 hours of in-service learning, and then followed by on-the-job learning, and then another in-service learning, right? This has been implemented since, I think, 2018. And then we also have another Diklat, right? Diklat Penguatan Kepala Sekolah. This is for a more experienced principal who has been in service prior April 2018, right? This is a shorter format of training, 70 hours of in-service workshops. And then outside this, of course, there are actually a lot, right? Be it from the government or the non-government organizations, right? In the past, we have had a Bermutu program, which is supported also, I think, by the Australian government. And then PRODEP, right? And then at the moment, I think the Australian government also supported Inovasi. And then not to mention, there are also philanthropic and NGO just like us, right? Pintar from Tanoto Foundation, and then Lighthouse School from Putra Sampurna Foundation. So there has been a lot, right? A lot has been tried actually to put in place a training to support our teachers and our school principals. But I guess the problem is that the competency remains a challenge, right? For example, for a school principal itself, there was a research, I think, by ACDP in 2018 saying that one of the key competency of school principals, yeah, which is academic supervision, and to some extent the using of information technology for either both for both management and teaching purposes are still considered the most difficult competency to be mastered by principals. This is I think the research asked the principals themselves, right? So this is a self-rating research, and I think a lot of principals at the time say that yeah, it is one of the toughest skills to master, right? And then on the teachers, I think I'm cited a publication here by SMERU that I think in 2015 they say 1.3 million out of 1.6 million of teachers are still below the competency capaian minimum dari UKG-nya ya, uji kompetensi guru. So what I'm trying to send the message here is that although the training has been there for some times, right? It is there, but the competency, right, of the beneficiary remains a challenge, right? So this is a problem that we all need to pay attention to. Now that findings also it was confirmed by our own project baseline. So one of the interesting part is that to our principal beneficiary in Karawang, we ask and observe whether they do some of the key academic supervision function, ya, atau supak, ya, atau instructional leadership practice, right? The first one is like whether they do lesson plan review, mereview RPP Bapak Ibu gurunya, atau yang kedua melakukan observasi pembelajaran, ya, classroom observation, atau mereka mereview assessment, ya, penilaiannya direview atau enggak. Dan another one is whether the school develop a school plan, right, the RKAS or the or even the longer term, the apa yang ada 5 tahun, kan ada yang 1 tahun 5 tahun. The majority, alhamdulillahnya, the majority of our principals say that they actually practice those functions, right? But when we see and then when we observe the practice of their teachers, their overall teachers' effectiveness score is pretty low, right? 2.5 out of 8 practices. So there we just simplify it by identifying like at least 8 basic practices that teacher has to be doing whenever they teach, right? Jadi apakah misalnya teknik bertanyanya itu sudah pertanyaan yang terbuka, bukan hanya sudah paham, sudah mengerti atau tidak mengerti. So we ask, so that's one of the observation point. Another one is whether the teacher is actually applying an active learning, right? Or is it just a lecturing and then giving an assignment for the students? So there are 8 items of them. So in general, they just do 2.5. So that's like between 2 or 3 in general, right? So there is a gap, right, between what the principals are supervising, right, but the supervisee doesn't seem to be reflecting the practice, right? And then the interesting point is that we later also asked to the principals, are they actually generally satisfied with the performance of their teachers, right? And in general, out of 10, they provide a pretty high satisfaction score, right? 7.8 for madrasah school, because we also work with some madrasahs. And then for public schools are like, yeah, if we round it up, it's probably at 7, right? So there are a gap also, right? That the principals are relatively okay with the fact that actually objectively the teaching's practices are not actually optimum, right? At the optimum level. This could also be a problem of expectation, actually, right? So that's that issue. So now we discuss about trainings, right? We know the problems is like that. So supposedly trainings are the remedy, ya, obatnya ya kita pakai training supaya praktisnya lebih baik, dan we support by trainings, right? But before going on to what we actually try to do and experiment, right? It's actually worth seeing what the evidence say about training. This is actually what the Global School Leaders Network are trying to always learn something new. If there are new evidence regarding certain practices that actually help school principals to better their teaching practices of their teachers, right? So overall, I think none of these are news for teachers, bukan hal baru ya buat untuk Bapak Ibu guru kepala sekolah yang mungkin mendengarkan di sini gitu. Jadi professional development training, some of the characteristics should be like combination theory and practice, right? Kalau teori terus mungkin bosan, tidak relevan, jadi harus ada praktiknya. Lalu harus applying adult learning principles, right? So starting with what the principals are actually finding hard at their own job. So that's like where to begin with for the training, rather than, you know, assuming they start from zero. And then providing opportunities to interact with other colleagues, ya. Jadi kepala sekolah mungkin diberi kesempatan untuk interak dengan kepala sekolah yang lain untuk saling belajar, mungkin bisa juga dengan difasilitasi oleh ada mentor atau ada coaching, jadi dia bisa lebih terarah begitu, belajar satu sama lainnya. Dan yang terakhir tentu saja adalah align with a local context, because every school has its own challenge to address, to deal with, right? So it cannot be like one size fits all kind of approach, right? And then there was actually another evaluation. I think this one is also by ACDP in 2013, asking to the principals, like, what kind of trainings do you guys like? Essentially, that was like the question. So more or less the response was like, need to balance between face-to-face workshop, workplace application, and mentoring. And then they also say teams of people from the same workplace or school participate together. Because, you know, after going back from the training, probably it's difficult to make change at school if they are the only one who understand about the content of the training. You know, so having a buddy from the school actually helps membantu ya ketika dia mengimplementasikan di sekolahnya. So I'm gonna skip this one. I think this is just another evidence of saying like what kind of trainings that works. But I would like to, I think, point out just one point here. The research says that when they ask like who is learning the most from training, right? I would like to ask like a lot of response from the audience here. They say younger participants, especially younger kepala sekolah, yeah, because I think the research was on kepala sekolah. They say tend to gain the most from training compared to the relatively older and experienced principals. Jadi kepala sekolah yang muda, katanya, saya mengharapkan respon dari Bapak Ibu kepala sekolah yang mungkin mengkategorikan dirinya sudah tidak muda gitu ya. Katanya kalau kepala sekolah yang muda itu gain-nya lebih tinggi dari training-training yang dilakukan ketimbang kepala sekolah yang senior, ya, saya nggak mau age shaming, senior. I think that's an interesting point. So learning from all that and then understanding the context, right? What have we learned from the past 1 year, right? A little bit over a year now from our own program. So what we do, actually, just to give you some context as well. So what we do is essentially a workshop, right? Forum, right, combined with a school facilitation, right, like coaching at their own school. And this cycle is keep repeated for around 11 or 12 round throughout the year, throughout the academic year. So we try not to be a tabrak lari approach, right? We also like want to follow up with the workshop and then pendampingan and then another workshop and then another pendampingan for 11 rounds. And this is just a total of number of cycle of workshops and pendampingan that we're planning to do. Of course, we are still in July 2020, so we are in this cycle. So there will be another one, another semester next year, right? So in total, we have been doing around like seven cycle of workshops. So what we do is that last semester, we focus our training a lot on growth mindsets and then problem solving skills, right? What we mean by that is like each workshop, we cover one area of mindset and problem solving skills. So like problem identification, analysis, implementing action, evaluating and reflecting, all of this regarding teaching and learning practices of their own school, right? So we want to do that. And then earlier this semester, from January until April this year, we focus more on the technical side of the principal job, the SUPAK, supervisi akademik. So reviewing lesson plan, and then classroom observation, and supervising assessment. So this has been done. This is what has been done by us so far, right? Now, what have we learned is like the first one is that out of all of the trainings that we have run with them, the implementation of action plan is the hardest for the school principals, right? So these are the 7 workshop on the left-hand side. There are a bar showing the understanding of knowledge and skills level of the participants. So there are 7 bars representing 7 workshops and coaching, right? The third one is when they are doing implementation. So a little bit weak on that one, but the rest are quite okay lah, right? So workshop 3 consisting of providing feedback, working with teachers, time management, that kind of stuff, right? And then principals who are unable to build positive team relationship fail to encourage better teaching practices. This might sound quite straightforward and clear for most of us, but it's actually quite a learning process for us, because the principals cannot just make their teachers do the teachings well if the team relationship is still problematic, right? By problematic means like, just to give you an example, misalnya konflik antara guru senior dan guru junior, so kepala sekolahnya agak bingung untuk menengahi, lalu ada kepala sekolah lama masih ada di antara guru-gurunya misalnya, jadi agak euuh-pakeuuh untuk memberikan pengarahan, and some other issues regarding the team management, right? So we would say that I think prioritizing people mindset skills rather than technical ones do matters a lot rather than the technical one. And of course, like mindset of a leader, this is just to re-emphasize, mindset of a leader, not technical skills, is associated from our data actually, is associated with better teaching practices. This is quite interesting, because we always thought that it's actually their technical capability and all that, but actually the mindset of the principals is actually what matters the most in terms of improving the teachers' practice, yeah. And this is, please don't take this wrong. The second conclusion is that frekuensi dari kepala sekolah melakukan supervisi akademik itu ternyata tidak berkorelasi dengan better teaching practice. Tapi pesannya bukan malah jangan sampai gini ya Bapak Ibu, jangan sampai wah berarti kepala sekolah nggak perlu melakukan academic supervisi, bukan kesana pesannya. But this is probably a call for us to make the academic supervision practice more effective, right? And then so I'm sorry if this is a little bit too clutter from the slide, but essentially what we thought, apa yang kita bayangkan sebelumnya itu adalah growth mindset-nya principal nih yang atas, itu membuat dia praktik supervisi akademiknya lebih baik, sehingga teaching practice-nya lebih baik. Tapi ternyata dari data kita ini tidak berkorelasi, jadi growth mindset-nya kepala sekolah ternyata nggak ngaruh juga pada supervisi akademik, begitu, nggak ada hubungannya, dan sering jarangnya melakukan supervisi akademik nggak berpengaruh apa-apa pada better teaching practices-nya. Nah, tapi yang menarik adalah growth mindset principle, jadi principle yang mungkin mindset-nya lebih berkembang ya, segala sesuatunya bisa dihadapi, bisa aja dulu, coba aja dulu, nggak gampang menyerah. Principle yang punya mindset kayak gitu ternyata teaching practice dari guru-gurunya itu lebih bagus gitu. Jadi berkorelasi positif. Nah, justru yang pertanyaan kita ini yang kita belum tahu jawabannya, mekanismenya jadi via apa nih? Jadi mungkin kalau yang kita bayangkan dari lapangan adalah misalnya kepala sekolah yang growth mindset-nya bagus, itu misalnya dia nggak necessarily langsung melakukan supervisi akademik, tapi dia lebih mendorong agar guru-gurunya belajar satu sama lain misalnya. Jadi bukan kepala sekolahnya langsung yang memberikan pengarahan, tapi dia set the environment lah for the teachers to be learning from one another, atau bahkan dia resourceful, jadi untuk mengembangkan gurunya dia pakai cara-cara yang lain. Kalau dia nggak ngerti, maka dia ajak orang lain. So this is quite eye-opening for us that mindset actually matters a lot when it comes to a better teaching practice at school from the principal. Jadi kita sebetulnya we're just focusing a lot on the soft skills, right? Knowing that growth mindset matters the most for school principals, for the school's teaching practice. So we invest a lot on developing that soft skills and then problem-solving skills of the principals. And when we do the midline, we actually got some preliminary promising data showing that the principals are having a better like growth mindset, and then they develop more internal motivation. Ya, motivasinya jadi internal, jadi dia lebih semangat untuk menjalankan tugasnya, dan harapannya nanti bisa transform into their teachers gitu. Ini juga ya kurang lebih pesannya sama. Jadi principals dengan growth mindset itu lebih mampu biasanya untuk dan mau untuk mengimplementasikan pemecahan masalah yang terjadi terkait pembelajaran di sekolahnya. So training contents and coaching then needs to invest more focus on mindset and people skills. I'm not saying that technical skills don't matter, but frankly speaking, for Indonesia, I think especially for in-service principals, right, the technical training has been in abundance, right? Ada banyak sekali training yang diberikan dari mulai instrumen, regulasi, segala sesuatu tentang praktek yang harus dilakukan kepala sekolah. Mungkin Bapak Ibu guru sama kepala sekolah di sini udah hafal sekali, ada banyak gitu. Cuma kita tahu mungkin perlu didukungnya adalah misalnya bagaimana memberikan feedback kepada guru, lalu bagaimana untuk memulai percakapan, how to have a difficult conversation with their teachers, that's probably needs some support, dan how to delegate effectively, managing conflict di tim itu seperti apa, dan problem solving. I think these skills needs to be a little bit more supported when it comes to in-service teachers. And then I'll just, I think I'm a little bit over time here. I'm utilizing the excess time from Cheryl.
Yeah, it would be great if you can, maybe we have some time to discuss.
Yeah, sure. Just two more points. I think the missing point, because that's like the topic of our discussion, in addition to the content regarding the soft skills or people skills, is that training for principals or teachers, I would argue it would also be the same, is that we should utilizing local community, because they don't learn like in silo on themselves and then get better at their job, but they are having this community which is called K3S. This is one of the mistakes that I think INSPIRASI did in the first pilot, is that we don't tap into the existing of the local community, the K3S, so we just invite them into a training and then we mendampingi mereka di sekolah, tapi we don't really use their community in these terms, the K3S. And then the last one that I think a lot of programs are guilty about this is that we should have involved a lot more of the local system leaders, in this case the supervisors and the K3S coordinators, because at the end of the day supervisors are the one who is membina guru-gurunya and that kepala sekolah dan guru. So by leaving them out, that leaves a little bit of a gap of knowledge between the principals and the one who is supposedly responsible for their practices. So this is actually one of the mistakes that we did that we want to fix in the future. So just to conclude, coming back to the questions, what are missing from the training so far, I would argue that there are at least 3 points. So one is that for in-service, I think for in-service principles, I think we should focus a lot training on the mindset and the people skills, and then utilizing local community to optimize learning, and of course to involve system leader and supervisors. So I think that would conclude my presentation, and I hope to discuss a lot of this with many of the participants here. Thank you. Back to you, Ibu Lydia.
Okay, terima kasih Pak Patrya for the great presentation. Just to remind everyone that you can click on the raise hand function. If you search down below, you can see reaction, and you can click if you have the, and then right click and see the raise hand function. Yeah. So after you raise your hand, we will unmute you to pose your question directly. So right now, no one is raising their hand. Come on, peserta. So I have a few questions, but maybe for Pak Patrya, I'm thinking about a teacher having to go through mostly 4-year college, yeah. Shouldn't they have learned this leadership abilities or problem-solving skills when they do their teachers training? So shouldn't this be integrated as part of the teachers training? I believe it might be, but maybe you can discuss a little bit why when they graduate they are not ready. Yeah, maybe they need apprenticeship or something like that. And a question to Cheryl is maybe, I don't know how much you know about the teachers training process in Indonesia and also the INSPIRASI program in Indonesia, but maybe you can touch a little bit on how it compares with Malaysia. I don't know the student outcome indicators in detail, but I believe probably Malaysia has better student outcome, learning outcomes than Indonesia. So if you can maybe just touch on 1 or 2 things that you see are done differently, maybe in terms of training. Yeah. In the meanwhile, we wait for other people to pose their question. Bila Anda ingin tanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan. So maybe I take one question as well from Ibu Excelita Syahrani.
Halo.
Halo, silakan Ibu Excelita.
Halo, selamat siang.
Siang.
I hope my voice is clear. So
yes,
I'm
it's clear, Bu.
With Mr. Patrya's presentation, and I have 2 questions about that.
Okay.
If you don't mind. The first one is there any reference for the module, or was it original by INSPIRASI, and is it open for public? Because I think it will be interesting to read more about that. And the second question is, are the trainers for principal and teachers from internal INSPIRASI as well? And were they trained? Like, are there any training for trainers?
Okay.
Okay, great question. Thank you. Yeah, maybe you can ask the question, answer the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Cheryl would have a lot to add as well, especially comparing to Malaysia, because there are a lot to learn from Malaysia actually. So Mbak Excel tadi reference for module, it is open. We are always happily share with whomever. I don't think it is uploaded in our website yet though. But I think after this, I think in the slide that later on will be shared, I think we'll have the email address, so you could freely contact us. So then we would gladly share and even have a chit chat on that. So that's surely open. And then we have been sharing that with MOAC and MORA as well, with the Ministry of Religious Affairs. With regard to trainers, now this is the tricky part. So far, because we are pilot, right? we don't yet need to have a training of trainers, right? We could do it like from our own facilitators or project managers in the field. So we recruited our own. But here is the but, because learning from the past, we know that we need to engage the local supervisors, right? So in the next cycle, I mean in the next training cycle, we would like to have the principals, the supervisors and the K3S community leaders, the pengurus K3S, to be co-facilitating with us. So it won't be one organization show or one facilitator show to facilitate, because I think at the end of the day, they need to be more empowered, right, rather than substituted. I think that's where we stand. I'm sure there are actually research also regarding trainer of trainers, right? There has been many criticism regarding cascading model of training, that there are certain of master trainers and then training again and then training again. So if you know a game, Chinese whisper games, if you started with 100% information, it got to the bottom, it's probably only like 25-30%. So that's exactly why we want to work with the community. So the idea is that the community could adopt practices, so then they wouldn't need in perpetual external materials from a program like us, essentially. So that's it is. Do you want to add something, Cheryl, regarding the Malaysian practice, I guess?
So I think for me, in Malaysia, a lot of processes. So how are we different from what INSPIRASI is doing? For Malaysia, a lot of processes are already in place. Like I said just now, because it's a centralized education system, so meaning the federal actually comes out with all these ideas and strategies for school leaders, meaning how to carry out lesson observations, how to carry out a good lesson. So our role as PEMIMPIN-GSL is to ensure that this is being implemented effectively. Because a lot of structures and systems are in place, what we also find is oftentimes a lot of our school leaders just focus on very process driven, very administrative driven, not really focusing on student outcomes or something that is that can bring greater impact, I think. So I feel like Malaysia, we are in a good place. Our student outcomes is all right, but we can actually be at a greater place if we just like do that extra mile, that push. Then when we look beyond just the standards of like, okay, we tick, everything is a tick in a box, but how do we go beyond this? And how do we really bring meaningful student outcomes? I think that is our struggle here. Our infrastructure is all right, schools are quite complete and all of that. But how do we take it to the next level, which is to make learning more meaningful? I think that's where Pemimpin comes in, and that's where we try to work with the school leaders to help them to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I had mentioned about the training at the teachers training institute and how it was what's missing from there, so that they need the extra training after working. Maybe Pak Patrya can answer that question.
Ini yang tadi Bu Lydia tanya pertama ya, was it?
Ya, kekurangannya yang di training dalam ketika mereka di sekolah apa ya.
So because we are actually same with Pemimpin, right? Because we are actually focusing a lot on principles mostly. So I would, although like I probably have read a research or two about the teachers training in Indonesia, but I wouldn't go to that territory. I don't have enough knowledge to be able to opinionate on that. But on the principles training, actually, it is actually there. So if the question is, are problem solvings are there? It is there. I think there is in one of the modules, there are problem solving. But I guess in its entirety, sometimes possibly because the module is quite packed, right? It is encompassing from A to Z regarding what principals needs to be doing. So perhaps, sometimes when you are in the training, you're kind of like overwhelmed because you are so busy finishing the LK, lembar kerja, that's what they say in the trainings. So not much attention given to actual practicing on the field, right? Because they do the workshop, like I think 7 to 10 days in one centralized place. And then they have RTL follow-up to be done at the school for approximately probably 3 months on their own. And, they are actually pendamping, but it's not really as intensive. So, a lot of support probably are not met during that time before the final workshop for reporting. So I think what I'm saying is that I guess that is good, but I guess to support after that, right, for in-service, I think more intense pendampingan, right, to have someone to look on your shoulder if things go wrong. I think that would be very beneficial for our school leaders in Indonesia because, that's what we learn. I think coaching part is more meaningful than the workshop itself, to be honest. What do you think, Cheryl, in Malaysia? Do you think the coaching and the...
Yeah. I think the teacher trainings, and we even have a principal training institute in Malaysia, they prepare them a lot for before the role. But what we are looking at is more of an in-service support as they're doing their job to learn from work, not take them away from work to learn. So like, how can they actually learn from the work that they're doing? And what we found, which is the same as INSPIRASI, is that coaching is the most effective form. They really liked having someone to bounce ideas, having someone to like help them with implementation, and most importantly to contextualize what they've learned at the workshop to their schools, because we know that not all schools are the same. I think in Malaysia is the case as well. So whenever they go for trainings, usually these trainings are very general, it's very big picture, it's very theory based. But what we try to do is try to localize it, try to contextualize it, and really give them like a personalized solution for their schools.
As economists, I always think that sometimes you need to provide an incentive system to kind of push people to attain the level of performance that is maximized, basically. Is this something that within the training you have built into? Is that something in the training itself, or in the structure for incentive structure for principals at the moment in Indonesia?
Well, from our program, I think it would have been nice to experiment with it, right? Like if you add like an incentive, would that change the behavior? But I think we, apart from institutional limitation aside, because we cannot give that, like an NGO providing an extra salary, that would be a little bit difficult to implement. So what we are taking, like our path would be to instead develop that internal motivations. So that's where growth mindset comes in. And we measure that, actually, we survey that. So then the idea is the principals do their functions not because of external push, or when your supervisors or the Dinas Pendidikan ask you and then you perform, but like there are actually reasons for the stuff that we are nudging them to be doing. So that's our position. But like, I think in terms of the general situation in Indonesia itself, I think if you are principals, I think you are entitled to already tunjangan, yeah. So that's like in the past, principals is tugas tambahan guru, jadi mereka harus mengajar sekian jam, and then they are entitled to the tunjangan. But I think now, as of now, the status is that they are not teachers, so principals could focus solely on leading and managing the schools, and they are entitled to the tunjangan. I forgot the name. I think it's tunjangan TKG. Namanya masih tetap tunjangan kinerja guru kalau saya nggak salah, tapi tetap buat kepala sekolah. So the incentive is actually in place, but of course it's not really tied to certain performance metrics.
Performance, Yep.
So it's given.
Okay, let me invite others to post a question or maybe give a comment. We also have people watching on YouTube. So if you have a comment or a question, you can post it there, and we can help post the question on Zoom. Yeah. Right now, I don't see anyone raising their hand. I see that there's Ibu Sri Rahmat from BPS here. Earlier, I saw Professor Cipriono, but I think sudah keluar dari ruangan. Yeah. So if there are no questions, I'd like to just remind everyone that the recording will be available, and we'll put up the slides as well. From my notes, I have a little bit of question about the current condition, the pandemic, yeah. If no one else is asking a question. So a lot of people outcomes are going to even worsen, yeah, during the pandemic, especially because we see that it's not going anywhere, ya. Di Indonesia masih jauh, di Malaysia sudah sekolah kembali dan sebagainya, tapi di Indonesia mungkin masih akan naik terus, dan kita tidak tahu kapan bisa masuk. So what would you if there is, we cannot do anything, budget is limited, we might be looking at this pandemic until the end of the year in Indonesia. From this perspective of preparing teachers, preparing them for maybe the short run until the end of the year, what would be, not only for schools, but for NGOs, for donor agencies, for partnerships with universities and with others, for example, what would be the one or two main strategies that we can do to help make sure that learning outcomes is not some as at the least loss as possible? Yeah.
I think I'll just start. I think from our end, there are two things, I guess. So one is that it is actually a good time, a perfect time to reintroduce the concept of teach at the right level. So meaning that if children or a student is like administratively at 4th grade, but if the learning level is still at the 2nd grade, so do not force her or him to learn at 4th grade level, right? But to meet them where they are, right? Especially this is important because basically last semester was, it's just a lost semester, wasn't it? It went until February, and then March onwards, it wasn't really any effective teaching. The schools are confused as well. Everyone's confused. Yeah. So I think to start the academic calendar, to assess first where the students are, and then tailor the teaching process to where they are. I think that's really important. because masih ada juga kalau di Indonesia yang kelas 4 ya sudah mengerjakan LKS kelas 4 gitu, lembaga kerja siswa kelas 4, and then just as usual. So that would like worsen the learning loss actually if you do that.
And also that puts pressures on this teacher because she's teaching 4th grade, but the 3rd grade didn't fully happen.
Yeah. And then the implication as well will go to their parents as well, right? Like my kids at school, but what do they learn? They're not really learning a lot. The level are not where they are. And the second one is, I think this is actually a perfect time to, not a perfect time, but again, it's more than any time in the past that we need to support our school leaders, our principals, to navigate the situation, especially if you're still belajar dari rumah, if you're learning from home. Because let's face it, every school has its own unique community with its own challenge. Some probably has more access than the rest, and some are probably more attuned to online learning, because access doesn't necessarily mean they are able to do it. So they need the ability to be agile. They need the room to be agile for the school leaders, because at the end of the day, the teachers will follow the principals. Although I think to a lot of people would say just support the teachers, but I would say just support the school leaders, because then they will work the team out to find the best solution of learning of their own school. I think those two. So teach at the right level, support the principals. I guess that's the two things. I don't know. What do you think, Cheryl, in Malaysia? Well, you guys are going back to normal.
I think when I think about like the first time we went to lockdown and what were some of the things that we really pushed our school leaders to do, number one is to look back at the Maslow hierarchy of needs, to actually try to reach out to students first, number one, to see if they are okay, if their families are okay in this pandemic. It's very important for school leaders to also act like community leaders. So what we found is that a lot of families were reaching out to schools to ask for help and all of that, and that showed how important the school leader is. So the first thing is to actually find out if your students are okay, if they're safe, if they are well. And then the second thing is we ask them to do an analysis to see the level of internet access for their students. What's the bandwidth like? Do they have access? Is there enough data? Is there enough devices? And then after they've done all of this, then plan for the most appropriate and best lessons that they can do. We even told them to, like I said just now, like homework delivery system, anything just as long as students are learning. But also we reminded them that most importantly is to go easy, to be gentle with themselves, because everyone's staying at home, right? They are staying at home, the students are at home, the teachers are at home. So it's not to put too much pressure on like just ensuring like learning has to happen as though it's in the classroom. It shouldn't. At least some sort of learning must take place, but it shouldn't be like exactly replicated from the classroom to online. That won't work. So to really figure out what is the best thing for your school, where is your school at, and how you just want to push it just for this pandemic, and how can they, at least some learning is going on. I think that was very important for us when we first went into lockdown.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. I'm just curious, Ibu Lydia, I'm just curious, like in Malaysia, when you are going back to school, what's the physical environment looks like if you are sitting on your desk? I'm just curious, because I looked at some funny pictures regarding our own model in high school yesterday, and I'm not really sure if that's the most comfortable way of learning.
Ours is just 1 meter apart with mask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do they put like in a box, some kind of like? Okay.
No box, nothing. 1 meter apart. Mask and temperature check every day before they enter school and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, but the level of infection is very low in Malaysia. So yeah, that's our challenge, because our infection is still increasing, but we want to open up some activities. So That's going to be very challenging. And what Cheryl mentioned are about school leaders being leaders in the community. I think that's also a very good point, because we do see them being in pressure, of performing. And in fact, maybe 1 week ago, we saw a mass resignation request from principals. Did you read that? I forgot which, but I think it was in Java. More mass school principals applied for resignation because they said there was pressure in the use of budget, and there were budget not only for government but from NGOs and so on. So I think it's very true that we need to support more our school leaders so that they can make the best decisions for the students. Okay, thank you very much for Cheryl, and thank you for Patrya for presentation. Let me quickly share again the screen where you can download the slides, and we'll put up a summary also where you can refer back and also forward for those watching. Thank you everyone for attending this today's webinar. We have another one next week that will be on urban design, how actually urban design is influencing the type of transport being chosen. And in Indonesia, it's increasingly motorcycles, dominating the roads. Thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you again at the next FKP. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak Patrya. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So
I am.
You are? Sorry?